filling out that poll. I'm gonna go ahead and open up the floor for public comments. As a reminder, as Kelly said before, we are in the very early stages of development of this project, and we're kind of experimenting a bit with this and trying to get input from a wide range of people before we have that fully baked policy, which means I know it might be frustrating because there's not a lot here for you to react to, but we'd still like to hear from you. We have some discussion questions that Kelly posted up on the slide here, some specific questions for you to respond to if you'd like, but we're also looking for overall thoughts around the policy, like how do you feel about the risk-based framework, or anything else you might think of. And this is not the last you're going to hear from us. We will continue to reach out over the next 8 months as we develop policy details. We plan to work with permittees and NGOs to make sure that we end up with a product that hopefully works for everyone. And then we'll also have a full comment period when we release the policy later this year. So a quick reminder again to provide verbal comments. You can click on the raise hand button to be placed in the speaker queue. And when it's your turn, the facilitator, I guess it's me, will call your name and invite you to unmute yourself. Please, when you do that, please introduce yourself with your name and your organization. I know we have a couple telephone callers online, so if you would like to speak, please press *9 to raise your hand and press *6 to unmute when prompted. If you have a question, please feel free to type your question into the Q&A box. We'll try to answer questions inside the Q&A box and or live. If you see a question that you think is important, please click the thumbs up button under the question to raise it up to the top of the list. Because we do have limited time, we will be stopping the meeting today at noon. We will limit verbal comments to 3 minutes, but remember also that you can email us your comments at storms@waterboards.ca.gov. And a quick reminder of our comment ground rules. This is a public discussion, not a debate. We encourage everybody to listen actively and with an open mind, and stay on point and on time. We are discussing the potential urban stormwater infiltration policy today. I know there's a lot of other things that are on people's mind, and a lot of things that kind of are related to this policy, but we're going to try and stay on task to the infiltration policy today. So looks like we've got a lot of folks. Oh, wow, we've got a lot of people responding to the full question. That's great. Thank you. We have another one. When are we doing the last poll? I've forgotten. Should we do it now?
I can do the second one now.
Yeah.
We have a request to put the setback slide up. If you want to share that for a little while.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and throw that other poll up while we're kind of getting some questions going, and people are queuing up and raising their hands. All right, so I'm going to start with the Q&A, and then I'll do a few of those, and then we'll move over to the live questions. So we have, first off, from an anonymous attendee, talking a little bit about how we're focusing on protecting groundwater while often infiltration systems are being used to meet surface water quality protection, but they are not. Failed to meet treatment standards and worsen conditions with stagnant and vector breathing chambers without filtration. These function as flow-through systems absent water quality treatment. So this policy is limited to infiltration systems and the protection of groundwater. The MS4 permits right now are the ones that deal with surface water violations when these systems fail. So it's something we've definitely talked about, but I don't think our policy is going to address these problems directly. Kelly, do you want to talk a little bit about our thoughts around operation and maintenance?
Yeah, that's why we're kind of hoping by having some operations and maintenance requirements where these systems need to be operating as intended and not causing nuisance problems ideally, that hopefully that'll be sort of indirectly addressed with the policy so that we don't have failing systems that are causing issues.
I updated the Q&A so that hopefully you can see the most upvotes will be at the top. So the first most upvoted one is from Brandon Steets.
Thank you. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me get this. Okay, so yeah, question from Brandon. What form will your policy take? Something like the recycled water policy, which is not a permit, or general statewide WDR permit, or waiver of a WDR permit? Yeah, thank you, Brandon, for this answer. We are still kind of figuring out the regulatory pathway that this will take. So it will be a statewide policy, a water quality control policy. But how that gets implemented is a great question. And so right now we're exploring the idea of implementing it through MS4 permits. We don't want, we've kind of gone away from the idea of a WDR waste discharge requirements simply because we don't want to create another permit for someone to have to apply for to implement a project that's required in a permit. So we're really trying to kind of keep the red tape low, in which case we would put it in through an MS4 permit. There are, I think, some issues with that, but that's something that we're working through and looking for. Hopefully that answers your question. Eric Ryan, most of the MS4 MPDES permits already have substantive substantive maintenance requirements. Isn't this duplicative of regulatory requirements already in place? Same with attachment I of the IGP. Yes, we're hoping to build off what's already there. We don't want to create duplicative requirements, but we do want to make it standard. Not all of the MS4 permits have those in place, and we want to be very specific about what's required for these infiltration systems when it comes to protecting groundwater, because that is something that's really, I think, lacking a little bit statewide. So some have it and some don't. Attachment I of the IGP, we are the industrial general permit for folks out there, and that's something we are working very closely with the permit writers from the industrial general permit reissuance team to determine if we can, I guess, how it'll play with the new reissuance of the IGP. All right, how will the policy align with stormwater permit requirements? I think maybe we've answered that. It will go into the MS4 permits, and we're hoping to encourage stormwater infiltration. We know, like Kelly said, there's a lot of benefits associated with stormwater infiltration, whether it be through groundwater recharge or protection of surface water. Anything else, Kelly?
I think you covered it for that question.
How will the policy from Kelly McEwen, how will the policy consider sea level rise and storm surges on the coast and in the Bay Area that will include saltwater? Kelly, that is a great question. And I don't have an answer to that, but it's something that we will add to our list of things that we're going to consider. Kelly, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think I don't really envision us having a specific policy language about that. That seems, I would hope that the local folks that are doing the design for the project are going to do the appropriate engineering and geotech work to take that into account for the location where the system would be implemented. So that's probably more in the design of an actual system phase, but hopefully that will be taken into consideration when citing specific projects.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, I am going to move over to some live questions. We'll do a little bit back and forth. So I've got David, who do we have first up for a comment?
So I think Tori Walker had their hand up first.
All right, Tori, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Tori Walker, Tori R. Walker Engineering. Um, Thank you for this presentation. And you started where you should, right? Start with why. Why are we doing this? But that led me to think about in especially Region 9, but we do work in throughout Southern California. We like to infiltrate. We find in Region 9 it's very constrained. We find it more the norm that we can't because of geology and so forth. So it just occurred to me that as like the city of San Diego, for example, is bringing on their pure water program and others like that, um, it seems that we should be having a conversation about capturing this stormwater and having an alternative to send it to the sanitary sewer system that where it can be treated along with sewage water. So I'm wondering if that could enter into the discussion, or is that a completely different um, discussion? And I'm thinking also you had the map of LA, and not surprising, a lot of subsurface contamination that would limit the applicability. So perhaps in places like that as well, where there's plenty of capacity for infiltration, but you don't want to be doing that. So that's my comment. So thank you.
Yeah, Kelly, you want to take
Yeah.
that?
No, that does make sense. And yeah, there are definitely places where you wouldn't want to put an infiltration system. And so for our policy, we're really trying to make standards for where you would want to infiltrate and how to do that appropriately. And so then I don't think it's within the purview of the policy to discuss diversion to sanitary sewer, although I think that's a great option for water that you need to get fully treated. But it is a little bit outside of the purview of the policy, but something to consider as an option for where you can't really put an infiltration system where it's infeasible.
Yeah, and I would at this point make a plug to stay tuned for future storms projects. Where I don't think it's part of this project per se, but it is something that we're looking at and how to encourage that and how to facilitate conversations between stormwater and wastewater folks. It's yeah, a big goal of ours.
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that. That makes a big difference. It will make a big difference. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, who do we have next, David?
Asia Jackson.
All right. Asia, am I saying that
Yes,
right?
it's Asia.
Asia, okay. Thank
I'm
you.
from City of Los Angeles Sanitation, so I'm on the operations side, but also have designed some of these as well. My question is regarding kind of like Tori's question was about how the MPDS permit allows more stormwater where feasible into the sewer system. But it's my question is more related to the setbacks. If you're looking at relation to the distribution pipes themselves, whether it's sewer or storm or drinking water, just because of I&I into the system, and also for SSO reporting, that would be a Cat 1 if it goes into an infiltration facility.
A good point. Yeah, you wouldn't want an infiltration like a dry well right by where you might expect a sanitary sewer overflow. So again, that's more of like a specific siting and design criteria, but it is something to think about maybe for including some kind of, maybe not a hard limit for setbacks, but some guidance or other language in the policy. That's a really good point.
Thank you. All right, we'll take one more and then we'll go back to the Q&A. Who do we have next?
Salem Rosenbaum.
All right, Salem. Go ahead.
Hi, otherwise known as Wayne Rosenbaum. Thank you.
Really?
We'd like to encourage in thinking about this. It wasn't clear. I'm not sure the policy is clear yet as to specific standards that or analyte concentrations that might be regulated under this policy for infiltration. The one thing we are finding and would encourage you to look at is what are appropriate standards to be used to assure protection of groundwater beneficial uses and water quality objectives. Applying drinking water standards, MCLs, to groundwater becomes really very problematic because, frankly, if we're being required to meet MCLs, there is no benefit to infiltration. So let's think if those kinds of standards are going to be implicated or incorporated into the policy, let's think very carefully about which standards are appropriate to protect groundwater versus some other goals. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. That's a great point, and it's certainly something that we agree with. We've done a lot of research. We've read, I think, probably all of the scientific literature on stormwater infiltration, and most of it shows that in general, most conventional stormwater contaminants are removed by the vadosol before it hits the groundwater. And so we don't want to make it any harder than it already is right now to put in these infiltration projects. We don't want to require that stormwater meet MCL before it gets infiltrated. And so what we're doing is really trying to figure out how much does that vadosol work when it comes to removing contaminants before getting to the groundwater that has those beneficial uses associated with it, and trying to really figure out what's safe and how we can promote all of the infiltration that we can.
Yeah, and this is a significant disconnect in attachment I, because for on-site, I've got to meet the MCLs, but if I'm off-site, I just meet the water quality objectives for the groundwater. Let's hope that this new policy will both clarify and rationalize that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're working very closely with the industrial general permit group and trying to kind of come up with an alternative that doesn't get rid of attachment I, but makes it so you don't have to make MCLs before infiltrating at industrial sites. Thank you for your comment. I'm going to go back to the Q&A. We have a lot of Q&A here. Wow. All right, let's see what's at the top. Okay, so we have an anonymous attendee. Regional boards currently require infiltration and provide very limited exceptions for infeasibility. Will the policy help to inform regional board development of future MS4 permits and provide support for infeasibility evaluations? So the policy will help to inform regional board development of future MS4 permits. I'm not so sure about the infeasibility evaluations. I think that's more of a site-specific kind of engineering evaluation. Kelly, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. That is more of a site. I don't know if we could have blanket language at the state policy level for that, but can definitely take a look at it and see what language exists currently and take that under consideration. That's a good point.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, next up, what are the current thoughts on the size of systems that will be subject to the policy? There's significant breadth between residential rain gardens and large-scale infiltration galleries. Kelly?
Yeah, so we don't want to add more stringent regulations on like residential rain gardens, small systems. So we really are looking towards larger systems or things like dry wells that can infiltrate a lot of stormwater quickly. But yeah, we're not trying to add additional requirements for like that bioswale median strip or your pervious pavement, things like that. And so we're still refining like an exact drainage area size, but it won't be tiny.
Okay, thank you. How will the risk tiers be managed for mixed land use areas? That's a great question. Kelly, you want to try that or you want me to take it?
Yeah, we are still figuring that out, but I think so for our low and medium risks, we do have some mixed land use definitions, like commercial, residential, or general urban areas. And then we're really trying to look more at specific land use categories that would bump that up a risk tier. And we are still refining that, but yeah, maybe we should look at all the different combinations of mixed land use areas, or that could be a consideration.
Okay, let's do one more before going back to the live comments. Can you talk more about the proposed approach to protect groundwater quality from PFAS compounds in urban stormwater runoff? There are water quality data from multiple sites indicating the concentrations of PFAS in urban stormwater runoff exceed the US EPA MCLs for PFAS compounds. PFAS is certainly something that we are looking at and trying to evaluate what the risk factors are for PFAS when it comes to stormwater and groundwater. We have staff that's taking a look at all of the data out there, all of the data that's coming in from our PFAS sampling project that we have, the water quality, drinking water quality projects that we have, as well as all of the sampling that we've done associated with the PFAS investigative orders that have gone out over the past 5 or so years. And we're trying to get a better understanding of where PFAS currently is in the groundwater and where it might be in the stormwater. So it is certainly something that we're looking at, and we're looking at, again, the different risk factors of where PFAS might be elevated in stormwater and why, and then where PFAS might already be in the groundwater. Kelly, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think you covered that pretty well. It's definitely a concern, and we're taking in all the knowledge and information we can as it becomes available.
All right. Let's move back over to the live Q&A. Who do we have, David?
Sure, we had James McAdam, but he seemed to have lowered his hand. So let's go to Chris Minton.
All right, Chris, good to hear you.
Good morning, Chris Minton of Flair Walker Associates. I was just doesn't need to be answered now, but just in terms of evaluating the implications of the policy, I just wanted to make sure you guys are thinking about the potential implications in terms of the number of projects that could be completed. So any new requirements are going to understandably cost money. That'll take away from the limited pool we have for more projects. So just thinking about it from that perspective. Also, in LA, there's a lot of urbanization, and so there could be a lot of high risk areas. So it'd be really good to look at how this policy would impact where projects could be done and the potential additional cost for pre-treatment. And then as think about MS4 permittees, how could limitations on project placement impact their ability to comply with the MS4 permit using infiltration and then requiring other potentially more expensive projects. So I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it, and I hope you guys get a chance to dig into that. And then just a follow-up request, if you could provide those potential thresholds for the tier 1 through 4 risk categories so folks could kind of start thinking about how it might impact them, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, so we're still developing those, what's going to fit in those risk categories. We're thinking low risk is, just as a general kind of idea, low risk is going to be residential areas, parks, those kind of areas. Kind of high risk will be, airports and PFAS factories, which we don't really have here in California, but high heavy industrial. And then in between is kind of that muddy zone, right, of where we're trying to figure out, you know, the risk levels of those. But it is something that we're developing, and we'll stay in touch, like I said before, with the permittees and everyone to kind of get a feel for what everyone's thoughts are on that. I'd like to address what you said first, though, and I think the last thing we want with this policy is to make it any harder to put in an infiltration system. We don't want there to be extra costs. We don't want it to be to add more any extra difficulty when it's safe to put in an infiltration system, right? We really need to make sure that we're protecting our groundwater. But we also understand, I mean, that's one thing that I really want to avoid with this policy is bringing in additional costs or issues. We don't want to make the projects last longer. Like, we want to get more infiltration in if possible. And so we're really taking a close look at these risk levels and trying to figure out what belongs in what risk level, and what that means as far as like you said, pre-treatment or sampling, to really try and make it easier. This project was started because of you know, our initial storms evaluation of what are the barriers to people doing stormwater capture and use, and one of the barriers was confusion around dry wells, and so we're really trying to make it clear and simplify that. Hopefully that won't create any more costs or anything. Yeah, Kelly, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think you covered it. But yeah, the main objective is to encourage infiltration and just make it clear when and where to do that. And a lot of land uses will likely be low risk. And there'll just be some additional requirements for medium and high risk just to protect groundwater quality, but it'll be clear guidance, ideally, that won't be super difficult or convoluted to follow.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chris. Do we have any others, their hands up?
Yeah, we have one more. We've got some people put their hands up and then put them back down. So if you guys, which is fine, but if you want to put them back up, we'll get you back in the queue. So Marvin Sashi, sorry if I mispronounced that.
You did a great job on my name, Saxey. Marv Saxey, Brash Industries. One quick question. There's a lot of wells that have been installed right now. Has anybody looked to examine what the actual pollutant discharges are getting into the groundwater, or what the results are for these wells being in place, and see what the actual impacts are?
Yeah, so there is some literature of a few localized studies. There's a study done in Elk Grove, but there are definitely data gaps with existing studies and literature on like the full suite of contaminants that you would want to look at. But as Amanda mentioned previously, there is the investigative order for drinking water wells, and so we can kind of see what's going on in the groundwater to some extent, but not pinpoint what exactly is coming from stormwater infiltration. But we are looking at the available studies, although there's not a ton of them specific to stormwater infiltration.
I totally support the concept, but I hope we don't become overly restrictive, and I'd like to see some good data, because I'm a big believer in natural attenuation, and I don't know that we've categorized it. Plus the fact anything going to groundwater goes through the Vado zone, and we don't know what happens in the Vado zone either. So I think we need to do some more actual sampling of what's going on at the existing wellheads, if that's possible.
Yeah, and the existing studies that have been done in literature do show that most conventional contaminants are removed or retained in the Vado zone. So there just are a few contaminants like PFAS, for example, that is not well treated by the Vado zone. So we want to be wary of those things. Yeah, the Vado zone does provide pretty excellent treatment for most things.
Great, thank you. Good luck on this, because I see a horror story of complexity in trying to establish some kind of standards, but we'll be here to help you.
Thank you. It's certainly a challenge. Okay, so we have a lot of questions in the Q&A. you know, if we don't get to all of these in the next hour, I'm thinking maybe we could email folks directly if they have their email associated with it. But let's get started. Are there plans for additional provisions for green streets slash ROW improvements, right-of-way improvements where infiltration is proposed? The spacing 100 feet between systems and pre-treatment requirements may be prohibitive from a cost and maintenance perspective. Given the unique context of many of these projects, is there a possibility for special considerations to be applied?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so definitely that's something I was trying to stress it, but maybe it's not super clear, but we want some kind of minimum standard setbacks. It's just like a starting place. And then if folks have geotechnical design engineering analyses that show that they are doing something different but still protective of groundwater quality, that would be totally fine, I think. So the setbacks aren't going to be the only way to do things, if that makes sense. We want to have alternate pathways to implement systems while still being protective of groundwater quality.
Yeah, and I'm gonna, these next two questions that we have in here are both related to the setbacks. It could be restrictive on sites using multiple dry wells, and also distance to surface water body when infiltrations are designed in conjunction with riparian restoration and buffer areas. Absolutely. We understand, again, this is kind of a minimum guideline. If there are engineering or if there's requirements that we need them closer, we're not going to completely prohibit that. If there are engineering studies or geotechnical studies that show that it's okay, then absolutely, like we're not making prohibitions at this point. Okay, next question from Benjamin Harris. Would this policy apply to urban river restoration projects that would lead to more groundwater infiltration due to restored surface water groundwater connection, i.e. removing concrete channels? If so, what risk would be assigned to those projects, and what would the treatment requirements look like if the intent is to return to a more natural surface ground connection? I don't think we're going to be applying this to urban river restoration projects simply because we're focusing on stormwater only before it gets to those urban rivers. I think it's an interesting question though, because there's that connection. And it's something that I think we can kind of take into consideration, but I think my short answer to that is no, because we're not looking at the urban rivers. We're just specifically looking at stormwater runoff. Right, Kelly?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like
right.
Adjacent, but out of scope for this policy.
Right. Okay, will there be, no, sorry, please pay special attention to how Storms defines a failing system and what criteria would be for remedial action. Would this be focused on damage / broken components of the infrastructure? Slower than expected infiltration rates due to underlying soil type should not automatically put a system into failing status. So do you want to speak a little bit about our kind of thoughts around what we're thinking about for the failing systems?
Yeah, that definition is still very much under development, so this is good information. But yeah, more things like nuisance conditions or like if they're flooding, if there's obvious signs. But yeah, it is hard to tell, like, what do you call a failing system? So we're still working on that. But yeah, probably not slower than expected infiltration rates. But if it's really bad and it's just flooding and not infiltrating at all, then that would be a concern, for example, or if there's monitoring downstream in the groundwater for some reason and nuisance conditions and it's in a high-risk land use type, something like that. But we will be very careful about specifying what is considered a failing system.
All right, next question. Will there be a distinction in setbacks between subsurface contamination in soils versus existing groundwater contamination in plumes? Yes, we are looking at both of those. And I think especially some large, we have large contaminated facilities or facilities with a large groundwater plume, but not much soil, or vice versa. They're obviously going to have different kind of requirements, and it's just going to have to be a site-specific sort of evaluation. But yeah, it's definitely something that we're looking at. How much coordination has the California Water Board had with counties and cities? Did we seek their needs and challenges before creating this? We've had, so I can say we've talked to all counties and cities across California, but we have had conversations with a number of especially bigger counties and cities. And overall, we've had support for this policy. And like I said before, there's been a lot of confusion, regulatory confusion. And for example, give Sacramento County as an example. Sacramento County right now is hesitant to allow any dry wells within the county because there is that confusion over when it's okay and when it's not. And so we're, like I said, seeking to really give very clear rules about when dry wells should not be installed. And as we develop this more, we will certainly be in coordination with counties and cities. All right. Erica Ryan, SIC codes should be grouped for high to low risk, non-industrial as a whole. Absolutely. We're not lumping industrial all together, and we will take into consideration what contaminants are present on the industrial site before we give them a risk level. All right, next question from Hal Schillinger. While sediment and organic debris isn't necessarily groundwater quality risk, it can degrade the infiltration capacity of a system over time. Will this clogging risk be considered as part of the pretreatment criteria development? Yes, and Kelly, I'll take this one. It looks like you're typing an answer. So the clogging risk, that's going to go into kind of the operation and maintenance requirements. We are, as part of an infiltration system, you should be having an operations and maintenance plan, and maintaining the system is part of the operations and maintenance. And so it will be considered as the part of the pretreatment criteria development. Absolutely. Let's see where now I've lost where I am here. Okay, anonymous attendee, do you anticipate the policy being cognizant of different types of infiltration measures, i.e. basin versus injection well, soil type, beta-sun interaction, etc.? Would there be a matrix of permitted infiltration measures and required pretreatment by project risk level? Kelly, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, so one thing we do want to avoid at the statewide policy level is being hyper-specific, and kind of eliminating flexibility at the regional and local level. And so I don't anticipate us having a matrix of permitted infiltration measures, because it's going to vary depending on your region, depending on your location, your subsurface conditions. That's kind of the tricky bit about infiltration, is it depends on a lot of different factors what's going to work in a specific location. And so I think we might have pretreatment requirements more focused on specific high risk land use types where we know there's contaminants of concern, and we can prescribe some kind of pretreatment measure that would mitigate the risk of those things, more than having a matrix of specific infiltration measures and requirements to allow more flexibility in implementation.
Thanks, Kelly. Okay, question from Karen Ashby. If one of the primary regulatory mechanisms will be MS4 permits, will staff be developing a compare-contrast matrix for all of the permits to understand what is currently required so that you can build off this and potentially avoid unnecessary conflicts? Yes, this is important since many agencies may have to revise their development standards if there are changes. Kelly.
Yeah, and we, in our literature review, we actually do have a lovely spreadsheet where we have been recording and comparing and contrasting a lot of the different MS4 permits. And so that is very much on our radar, and we are taking that into consideration. But that's a really good point that you bring up.
All right. Kevin Kaufman, regional board regulations vary considerably. Will proposed policy override these? I think that goes back to what Kelly just said. We're working with the regional boards, and we hope to make a consistent policy statewide. So if that means that some of the municipal permits need to change, then that'll happen. But it will likely be kind of along the next MS4 permit reissuance kind of schedule. All right, just to sorry, from Nathaniel Malone. Sorry to everybody whose names I am shredding. Just a suggestion that this policy guidance discuss EPA's Class 5 injection well requirements. Bioretention may be under this policy, but not an injection well. Infiltrations may or may not be considered an injection well. There's a lot of confusion on this. Kelly, any thoughts?
Yeah, so the EPA does technically maintain authority over what they consider underground injection controls for stormwater. However, yeah, we're not going against that. And their descriptions of what is considered an underground injection control for stormwater is actually somewhat confusing. And so we're going to have clear definitions from our perspective. And like full-on injection wells are outside of scope of this policy, but like a dry well where it is going through the Vados zone would be considered a stormwater infiltration measure. But yeah, so we hope to have clearer guidance so there is less confusion compared to the EPA table of definitions for underground injection controls for stormwater.
Okay, does this policy address the C3 stormwater technical guidance shortcomings and limitations? Will we be able to submit comments addressing certain sections that have issues and address it in the policy? So I'm not super familiar with the C3 stormwater technical guidance, but I'm assuming we're talking about the Bay Area technical guidance. So we're not going to have, I suggest if you have issues with that technical guidance and you would like us to address it in the policy, that you submit a comment letter to storms@waterboards.ca.gov, and we will take a look at that. And then again, this will be out for public comment later this year, and you can have a chance to comment on that then. Okay. David, stop me if we get any hands up, but I'm not seeing any. So I'm just going to keep going in this Q&A. From Kendra Boutros, you mentioned a few large infiltration systems that will be covered in this policy, but will there be an estimated size range, maybe based on runoff collected, to determine that if it meets the type of infiltrations that apply?
Yeah, I think we're still figuring that out, but it would be good to have a drainage area kind of cutoff level, I think. So we're not, like if you have a quarter acre of your own lawn that's draining into a bios, but like, yeah, we don't want to add more stringent regulations to really small, low risk systems like that. We don't have a numerical criteria for that yet.
Thank you. From Meg Kalal, Will there be any requirements around water quality monitoring, tracking, or reporting for this policy? And would the guidelines differ based on the use of groundwater basin? So it's going to depend on the risk level that the infiltration system falls in. If there will be requirements for monitoring, that's one of the things that we're evaluating, that we will likely have some sort of monitoring depending, especially for high risk projects. And also, yes, based on the use of the groundwater basin. So yeah, it's something that we're evaluating.
Can mix it up here, and we do have one hand raised by Chris Minton.
Chris, again. Go ahead.
I didn't want to take up too much of your time earlier. Just kind of a thought to throw out there. There might be the ability to treat the groundwater more cost effectively than at each infiltration project. So I'm just wondering, is there the ability to consider the potential for integrating some systems where you're infiltrating non-pre-treated stormwater and then addressing it when you take it out of the ground?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a challenge, and it's something that we consider a lot. And the problem with that is that we do have anti-degradation policy, right? And so making sure that what we're putting into the ground is kind of a benefit for the majority of people in the state. That's really important. And really kind of trying to figure out how to connect the drinking water suppliers with the stormwater managers and kind of coming to some sort of agreement there. It's a challenge. It's something that we're looking into for sure. The feasibility of it is difficult. If the groundwater below the infiltration system is already impacted, that certainly makes a difference, because there's no need to treat stormwater before it goes into a groundwater that already has, say, PFAS in it. So that's something that we're looking at. But yeah, that's a great point. All right, let's go back to the Q&A. Sean Bothwell, has the board considered or looked into impacts both in water quality or infiltration rates of trash/microplastics being full captured by stormwater capture? Recall that under the trash amendments, full capture devices are defined to include multi-benefit stormwater capture. Kelly, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we do actually I already have drafted policy language, but we do want to make sure that the trash provisions are still being implemented through this. So that would be a great example of like a minimum pre-treatment requirement is that trash needs to be captured and removed before the stormwater is infiltrated, just generally across all the systems. There are some good studies happening, or there's one study I know of that will hopefully get some actual data on microplastics. We don't really have great data on that yet. So we'll stay appraised of those studies going on. Yeah, we don't want trash going into the infiltration system, so that'll be in there.
All right, next question from Eric Maple. If the state's goal is to increase water supply, if water is captured as part of this policy, who owns the water? Well, the water goes, and once the water is infiltrated, it is no longer stormwater, and it can go into the groundwater basin, in which case it's a water of the state, and I think that's.
So Eric also had his hand up, so maybe he wants to chime in.
Oh, yeah, Eric, go ahead.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for fielding my question. I guess a follow-up question would be, I believe the goal is to increase water supply rather than the treatment or MS4 side. Does that sound correct? the water supply strategy? Is that the overall goal, is to increase water supply?
That's one of the goals, but we do also recognize that stormwater that's filtered and treated through the Veda zone and infiltrated also has a benefit of potentially not discharging those loads to sensitive aquatic environments. So we are still thinking about that, but yeah, the purview is more for infiltration and groundwater for the policy.
Okay. So my follow-up question is, can there be specific factors or exemptions on local agencies or MS4 permittees? So we're a water purveyor, also MS4 permittee. We've already invested a significant amount of money in redeveloping additional sources of water and environmental projects to reuse sources of water that were normally not usable, to turn those into sources. And those costs are currently borne by ratepayers. So will this policy force us to develop more sources through groundwater? Because we have a GSA, right? So water goes into the ground, we have a GSA, it's going to be somebody's water. So are our ratepayers now borne of those costs to develop additional sources when we may not need it because of this policy?
No, I don't see that happening from the policy.
Yeah, we're not going to be requiring that folks. We're not going to be requiring infiltration. This is if you're doing infiltration, these are the rules that you have to abide by. It sounds like you guys have a good system going on, and I don't want to mess with that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that nothing's mandated to be constructed as part of a project. This is only if an agency chooses to move forward with a project. Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. All right, let's move on here. Surface water quality objectives are very different than drinking water standards. Will pretreatment be designed to maintain drinking water standards? How will surface water and drinking water standards align? I think we answered that already. The Veda zone has a lot of power to attenuate, to naturally attenuate contaminants out of stormwater. So we're likely not going to require pretreatment to meet drinking water standards. Excuse me. That was loud. Okay, we've got a couple comments in the Q&A. Let's move on to David's question here. Perhaps you could provide an overview of how effective infiltration policies have been in other states, such as Washington and Oregon. So we have looked at a lot of other infiltration policies across the US and even in some other countries. I'm not sure that we have time to go too far into that today, but it will be in our staff report. But Kelly, do you want to maybe talk just a touch about kind of what we've learned from maybe Oregon?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really broad question.
Yeah.
I would say, like, having talked to the folks, like some folks in Washington and Oregon that have implemented their kind of statewide guidance, it seems to have had a net benefit for their management agencies and provided clarity. And so I would say that from what I hear, those policies have been effective. And again, like Amanda said, we are considering their guidance and data in developing our policy as well. And they have great documentation on their websites too for Washington and Oregon. So I would recommend reading those reports.
All right, Benjamin Harris, will the policy include discussion about soil contamination and remediation requirements? If an infiltration project ceases operation, who will be responsible to address any residual contamination resulting from the project, and what will the cleanup standard be? That's a great question. We're hoping, I mean, I think the intent of this project is not to create any new contamination. So it's something I think that we'll have to look into.
Yeah, would that fall under site cleanup authority?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if the if the soil contamination was such that it exceeds cleanup levels, then yes, there is the potential that there might be a cleanup project involved with that, but I'm not, it's something that we're gonna have to look into. It's an interesting question. And yeah, we'll take that into consideration. All right, are you considering a process for consideration or approval of measures that might be categorized as high risk and prohibited, but that have project specific attributes to justify a variance that are engineered? Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, how big of a concern is winter salt in California? We're working on updating the state's stormwater standards here in Maine. We have legitimate concerns about contamination of stream-based flow through winter salt entering groundwater through stormwater infiltration. It's not a huge concern here in California. I think we are in a very different environment than in Maine. I don't know the regulations around salting the roads. Yuri, Kelly, do you?
Yeah, so yeah, back east, we tend to salt the roads a lot more. So in California in the West, we're more concerned about sediment. So a lot of DOT maintenance facilities will use like volcanic sediment or different things to provide that traction, but we don't really apply salt as much. So our concern is more geared towards sediment. It's just a little different setup.
Sorry, we couldn't be of more help. When establishing standards, is the quality of existing groundwater going to be considered? Yes, we are.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you going to address the requirements for registering the underground injection systems with the EPA under the Class 5 injection well program?
Yeah, we will have a little bullet point that says, please register your underground injection controls for the EPA requirements, because they do still have the authority to require that, but it is very straightforward, and you just fill out a little form when you're implementing these systems. So that's really the only requirement. It shouldn't be too taxing.
Next up, what consideration of PFAS is there in the policy? Yes, studies show a baseline of PFAS and runoff, even from residential sites. Yes, there are. There's PFAS in our roofing materials. It's everywhere. So we're taking a close look at PFAS concentrations in stormwater and comparing that again to PFAS concentrations in groundwater to really evaluate what's necessary when it comes to treating for PFAS. Will this policy be applied for new development or redevelopment? What is the volumetric basis of design? I think we've discussed that already a little bit.
I think that pertains to the construction general permit. And so, yeah, our policy guidance would be implemented in that permit, but we will not at the policy level have a volumetric basis of design for specific systems.
All right. Well, setback standards are good minimum requirements. This is a suggestion. Require input and consult from groundwater management agencies. Yeah, we will take that into consideration. Thank you for your comment. I'm sorry, I'm trying to go through these because we have a lot. So yeah, if you have further questions, again, I'm going to plug the storms email, storms@waterboards.ca.gov. Feel free to email us there. Are there elements of this project that focus on the restoration of natural ecosystems and landscapes that are naturally designed to recharge groundwater? That is not in the scope of this project. While I'm supportive of all of that, again, not really what we're looking at. We're looking at infiltrating urban stormwater runoff. Kelly, anything to add?
Yeah, just exactly what you said. I mean, we'd love to see more natural ecosystem and landscape restoration, but this within the scope of the policy, we're really just trying to create clear guidance for stormwater infiltration projects.
All right, next question. I like this question. If the vadose attenuates most typical stormwater contaminants, what's the motivation to use dry wells, which bypass significant portions of the vadose and effectively reduce surface water treatment? Should more land use restrictions or pretreatment be implemented for the use of dry wells? So I'm going to go a little bit back to, I think, the beginnings of the presentation and also kind of geology. As we're trying to focus for this policy on projects that kind of skip that top few feet of soil because you know, as is insinuated here, the top few feet of soil that have lots of organic content, roots and plant material and stuff are really, really good at removing stormwater contaminants. And once you get past that, it's kind of slightly less effective. So the would like to note that dry wells, we're not injecting straight into groundwater. We are still having that vertical setback of, I think we're still trying to figure out the correct number that we need for that vertical setback, but there will be, and that vertical setback will allow for enough treatment in that vadose zone to effectively filter out all the contaminants before it hits the groundwater. Did I get all that, Kelly?
Yeah. So the dry wells are still within the vadose zone, and any of the projects in this policy, like Amanda said, are not direct injection to groundwater. And so there will be some vadose zone attenuation. And then, I mean, the benefits of dry wells too is that if you have not a lot of land to put in the infiltration, you can put it in a smaller footprint. So they're definitely helpful where they are needed to be implemented.
Next question. Will the policy consider stormwater storage tanks where infiltration is not feasible due to geology? At this point, no. We're only looking at infiltration. I would like to encourage the use of stormwater storage tanks, but that's a separate project. I think it's a great idea, but for now, we're just looking at infiltration. Will there be permitting or registration for detention and infiltration policies? I think that's what we're going for here, right? Am I missing the question, Kelly?
Will there be permitting or registration? I mean, I guess the permitting would be covered under the MS4 permits.
Right. And registration through the EPA underground injection controls. I think that's it. Okay, maybe Asia, if we didn't answer completely, if you could throw in another question in there. John McNamara. Oh, sorry.
You've got one that's most upvoted right now, says concern for practical impact of additional requirements.
I was going to type an answer to that.
Oh, sorry.
It looks like it's a comment, and we will take that into consideration when we're developing the policy. Thank you. Do we have a list of the existing stormwater infiltration sites? No, we do not. There is no. That's going to be each individual MS4 is going to have their own list of existing stormwater infiltration sites. We don't have a statewide list of that. Apologies. I believe during the Monday workshop, someone suggested policy should be statewide, not just limited to urban areas, and our response was receptive to that. I'd like to revisit that. So the scope of this project is limited to urban areas, and we talked a little bit about this over the past few days with the team. I'm pretty sure that we're going to keep the policy only applicable to urban areas. However, I believe there is kind of there's the possibility that if there is confusion in rural areas around infiltration, that they could use our policy as a guideline for what should and shouldn't go into the ground. And I think that might have to be done on a case-by-case basis. I don't think there's a lot of need at this point for this policy to kind of go beyond urban areas. But happy to reconsider if people have specific examples, please send us an email of what and why that would be needed, because we're struggling a little bit besides the examples that were given on Monday, and we're trying to work through that with some guidance rather than including it into the policy.
Amanda, could I just quickly pipe in on that one and just say that infiltration outside of urban areas is definitely something that we understand. There is a lot of unclarity about those kind of projects as well, and we are looking at potentially having a future project where we take a look at trying to clarify that for regional boards. So yeah, they will be kind of dealt with separately. This one for the urban areas is just a little bit ahead. Is that fair? Is that fair enough?
Yeah, thank you, David. I appreciate it. All right. Next question from Erica Ryan. MS4 permits already address the issues for failed systems. Have we read the requirements? They also prefer infiltration. Kelly, do you want to speak a little bit to the added value that the policy will have?
I think the added value of the statewide policy is to kind of make it more cohesive statewide. So we are wanting to look to existing MS4 permits and their requirements and do a crosswalk, and then yeah, so the added value of the policy is to not have different requirements everywhere at different levels that are confusing.
Okay, it looks like, right, from Kareem, I'm curious about the vertical setbacks for SHGWT. I'm not sure what the acronym is for, and groundwater table.
Easily high groundwater table.
Thank you, Kelly. And bedrock 10 and 5 feet. They seem to be very high as compared to the similar setback requirements in other jurisdictions. Can you explain the justification for these two setbacks? I'm not sure high, like there's too much setback or not enough setback. We're really in the beginning phases of, I mean, we're not set on these numbers, I think is what I'm trying to say. And we're using existing literature that's out there. We're using examples from other permits and other jurisdictions. So if you have strong feelings about what those setbacks should be, please shoot us an email.
And they are similar to the range of setbacks that are in other literature and kind of are middle of the road. And again, like if there's a specific site where those setbacks are not in the best interest of the project and that is shown through technical analysis, then they're just a starting point. And we are still developing them.
Okay, from Kevin. Kelly stated that the existing systems will be exempt from the proposed policy. Will this include Caltrans retention and detention facilities? They're not going to be exempt from the proposed policy. We're looking at how to evaluate existing systems and how they fit into the policy. And they will likely include Caltrans facilities.
Yeah, we are trying to exempt them from additional really onerous requirements, but yeah, they won't be fully outside of the purview of the policy. Sorry if that wasn't clear earlier.
What level of inspection, reporting, and oversight will be required? Dry wells and infiltration facilities present potential for contamination of the state's largest source drinking water. Yes, we don't know yet. We're still developing the levels of inspection and reporting and oversight. I think that's also going to be dependent on the regional boards for kind of providing that enforcement. But this policy will, I think, assist regional boards in allowing them to do the enforcement that needs to be done. So, yeah. Anything else, Kelly?
Yeah, I definitely agree. That is more on the implementation side where the regional boards would be doing the oversight and inspection. So we want to allow them to do their thing and provide guidance at the state level.
Some regional boards and MS4 permittees may still issue requirements that are above and beyond the policy when adopted. Disparity may still continue across the state. We're hopeful that that's not the case. We're really trying to work with the regional boards and to be able to get a clear statewide policy. Do need to, you know, I guess recognize that our state varies quite a bit when it comes to the needs of each individual region and kind of what their priorities are. And so, you know, we want to retain some sort of flexibility for the regional boards, but also, like I said, have some statewide consistency. So we are working with the regional boards who may have more hesitation, who may want to issue additional requirements and try and strike some sort of balance there. Will the new phase 2 stormwater permit mention restrictions on use of chambers for water quality treatment, or will it only focus on protecting groundwater? That's a phase 2 permit reissuance question that I am not sure about. So apologies, I can't answer that one.
Yeah, I'd recommend reaching out to the phase 2 contact email on the water board's website.
From John Penn. I think many issues are highly site specific. However, I think monitoring is important both for stormwater and receiving groundwater. The monitoring scheme could be flexible so that monitoring frequency could be adjusted depending on the data. Yes, we are working on trying to kind of come up with monitoring plans and the requirements for those plans. And I think it's going to be very site specific. But yes, monitoring frequency could be adjusted. What is monitored could be adjusted depending on the data, whether it's just stormwater influent, whether it's groundwater, effluent, you know, all of there's a whole lot of options there. And I think we'll put some guidelines together, but yeah, I think it's going to have to be very site specific. Right, we're whittling this down. 29 questions in 23 minutes. Can we do it?
Like rapid fire round.
Okay, can there be an exemption for water purveyor agency MS4 permittees if they've already invested in local water sources where the proposed infiltration projects are cost prohibitive for water ratepayers? I think this might be out of the scope, and I think it actually goes back. We're not requiring any infiltration be done. This is all voluntary. Purpose of the setback between infiltration systems. Kelly, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so the purpose of having sufficient setbacks between infiltration systems is that you're not putting too much, like a high enough volume of water that you're exceeding the capacity of the soil to infiltrate it from a hydraulic perspective, and then causing system backup and mounding and overflow. And again, like the specific site that infiltration systems are being implemented at, if there's good hydraulic conductivity in the subsurface, they could put systems closer. It just needs to be considered and analyzed in the design phase of the project.
Is the pending CII permit, let's see if I can get this, commercial institutional industrial, right? If you're a permit in Region 4 being considered regarding this policy. So we've talked to the CI permit writers in Region 4. If you're not familiar with that, it's a new permit that's covering kind of commercial properties what greater than a certain size, and it's only in 2 watersheds in the Los Angeles region. So we've spoken to them. That permit was written kind of well before we kicked off this project. We've looked at what they have to say. It is slightly more restrictive, I think, than we're going to be when it comes to this policy. And so if and when they reissue that, they will be, we can discuss that with them then. And then when we start looking at a potential statewide CII permit, which is still very much up in the air, we'll be working with those permit writers when that comes up. Is Storms intending to add asset management / tracking and reporting requirements into this policy? Is the intention for stormwater permittees to track and report metrics for permanent systems subject to the policy? If so, please consider not requiring as detailed reporting for tier 1 systems as would be required for medium or high risk systems. So our intention is not to track and report metrics for permitted systems. As much as we would like to know exactly how much stormwater we're capturing, I don't think that's a really feasible and worthwhile effort. So we're not going to be requiring that. Our policy will very much encourage an asset management and tracking database for permittees, but at this point, we're not really adding as a requirement. But I would encourage everybody to do so. All right. Okay, sorry, I was just reading this question before I read it out loud. So this is a question about the Vado zone. It does have attenuation limitations and varying contaminant soil and retention / attenuation capacities. It's very site and contaminant specific. What happens when a maximum soil retention capacity is attained for a given contaminant? What happens when redox conditions temporarily or spatially change? How might co-solute interactions or solute exchange processes impact retention and release of contaminants retained by the Vado zone with respect to potential impacts to groundwater quality? What about the loading and accumulation of persistent and non-degradable contaminants, i.e. PFAS, factored into the infiltration device design and consideration on impacts to long-term groundwater quality? That is a lot of questions. I'm not sure I can answer all of them right now. I think, so I'm trying to organize my response here. One is that we don't expect in the risk tiers that we have, if we are allowing an infiltration system to be put in without, a detailed engineering evaluation or approval, I guess, from the regional board, we're assuming that the contaminants are going to be low enough that none of these are going to happen. That the Vado zone, while it does have attenuation limitations, those limitations are very high compared to what we're seeing in stormwater, even over many, many years. But that is part of the kind of engineering evaluation when you do put in an infiltration system, is what is the lifetime of the system? And it is something that's reviewed when you do put in a system. And so these are all really good questions, and we are looking at all of them and thinking about all of them. But I think a lot of this is really kind of solved in the risk tiers that we have of high risk versus low risk, and that kind of is associated with what we expect to find in the groundwater. In the stormwater, and then through the engineering evaluation of what is the capacity of the soil to remove those contaminants. Kelly, is my engineer, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. Yeah, that is a very like site-specific question of the like subsurface conditions and soil characteristics that I would expect to be investigated in a specific project being implemented. But yeah, like Amanda said, a lot of the things that are found in stormwater are at low enough levels that in general, most things, with some exceptions, should be well removed in the Vados zone in most cases.
Right. How will surface water ecosystem needs be incorporated and balanced with the infiltration policy? We are, I think the intent of the policy is to further protect surface water, and keep contaminants out of the surface water for those kind of sensitive aquatic life. If you're talking about the water needs, you know, that we're talking about stormwater, urban stormwater runoff. So it's not something that we're specifically looking at with our policy, but it's we're hopeful that more infiltration of urban stormwater runoff will, in the end, benefit surface water ecosystems. Right, Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay.
That covers it.
Will the policy apply to an MS4 permit holder that has a waiver? What kind of waiver are we talking about, Kelly? Do you know specifics on this? I'm not familiar, and I don't know, and I think actually we might say we don't know the answer to that. We, right?
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
agree.
Sorry, we're still in the early phases of this, and we don't know exactly that. Okay, do we have plans to collect more data on how PFAS compounds migrate through the Vados zone? We would love to collect more data on how PFAS compounds migrate through the Vados zone. At this point, we don't necessarily have the funding to do so. We're looking into trying to, you know, fund some studies, or we're looking at other people that are doing this work, to really evaluate PFAS in stormwater and groundwater. But you're right, there's not a ton of data out there, and we do know that a lot of PFAS compounds do fit into this toxic, abundant, mobile, and persistent category of contaminants that we are concerned about moving through the Vados zone from stormwater to groundwater. So at this point, Water Board doesn't have plans to collect more data, but we would love it if others out there could and share that data with us, please. I know the policy will consider current land use and things like Superfund sites. Will the policy also consider location of leaking underground storage tanks, and will look at previous land uses? Yes, it will.
Yes. Yeah, that would be considered an existing open contaminated site.
Looks like we have a question about a specific infiltration system. I don't know enough about this specific infiltration system to say one way or the other, but if it is considered a dry well, then it will probably apply. Yeah, but I can't say, I guess, definitively one way or the other. Any chance that the practical approach shared by Amanda regarding needing drinking water MCLs before infiltrating can be applied in the draft CAI permit in the Los Angeles region? I think at this point it's too late to change that draft CAI permit. They are in the very final stages of approving. I think it was approved by EPA just recently, a couple months ago, and I think they expect to approve that in the next 6 months. So I don't think that at this point there's a way to get that into the CI permit before it's adopted. Sorry.
maybe in the reissuance. I don't know.
Maybe in the reissuance. Let's go with that. Comment. Will gaining streams and proximity interconnectivity to sensitive species habitat be considered in placement system placement, applicable standards or risk determination? We have I think in our setbacks, we discussed that a little bit, and yes. Kelly, can you speak to this?
Yeah, so we would have just a general setback to surface water, and then when you're designing and siting these systems, you'd want to have it be hydrologically disconnected from surface waters. So that kind of covers it.
Okay, will we be addressing the use of infiltration systems along the coast where infiltration could be hindered due to tidal influence? That's going to be a site-specific engineering evaluation that we're not going to be looking at in this policy. Have we reviewed regional board notice of violations issued on underground injection controls, et cetera, and are they being used to develop the policy? We've spoken with all of the regional boards about this project, and we have been talking with specifically the Los Angeles region around some of their industrial facilities. I am not, I guess I am not aware of NOVs issued on dry wells. Kelly, have you heard of any?
Yeah, I haven't heard this issue raised by our regional board collaborators, so no.
But if you have examples of it, we'd love to hear about it. You can send it to us at storms@waterboards.ca.gov. Okay, there's a number of questions here about have we looked at other resolutions, and yes. I guess I'm going to give a broad answer to a bunch of these questions. Yes, we have looked at a lot of cities, counties, infiltration guidances across the state, and like I said, across the country, other countries. We have we're taking into consideration everybody's and trying to pick the best from all of them. Low threat WDR, so it's something that we've evaluated, and if you're not aware, it's a waste discharge to land a waste discharge requirement that comes from a waste discharge, which could be considered for when we're talking about discharging groundwater. I'm sorry, I've been talking for too long straight. Something to be considered when we're talking about discharging stormwater to land, which then goes into groundwater. It's something that we've considered. Again, we're not really looking to add another permit or something for permittees to kind of get a WDR for something that's already required in a permit. But we're still keeping it in the back of our mind.
Yeah, and the permitting and the WDR side of things would come into play after the policy. So that's how the policy gets implemented, right? Which I think is maybe helpful to clarify that the policy is more high-level guidance that then gets implemented through various permits. And we are trying to not create a policy where additional permits need to be written to implement it, ideally.
Oh my gosh, we're really down to it. Wow. Okay, we have one question left, and we're at 11:53. This is amazing. Will the policy apply to vegetated surface infiltration basin that does not require removal of soil? And I think the answer is no.
Probably not. Yeah.
That's it. That's a really easy one. Thank you, anonymous attendee, for that last easy question. Woo. So last call for anyone who wants to comment, any questions, but if we don't have any, I want to, I guess, thank everyone again for sticking with us and attending our workshop. Your comments will help inform the development of our policy. We will have more public workshops in the future. Please subscribe to the Storms email list or the Urban Stormwater Infiltration email list to receive project updates. We also invite you to give more detailed feedback. Please submit your written comments to storms@waterboards.ca.gov by 12 noon on February 24th, or you can send physical letters to, I believe it's in the chat. And I think with that, that's it. And everybody have a great day and great weekend, and we will keep in touch.